Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Living on Blockchain. Today, we are speaking to Prakhar from Metasky.ai. Metasky is a B2C, B2B platform. Basically, for companies, they host campaigns to improve engagement in the communities, and for the users themselves, it creates a safe space for users to discover these campaigns and actively engage in these communities. They are actively working on utility-based NFTs as well, and we touched a lot upon that in this conversation. If you're somebody who's working on the next big NFT project, which is rooted in utility, then this is a conversation for you. I can't wait for you guys to hear this. Let's deep dive right in.
Okay, thank you so much for making the time to speak to me today. How are you doing?
Hey, Trusha, I'm good. Thanks for having me today.
Awesome. For our listeners, can you tell us a little about yourself and how you got in this space, your journey so far in Web3?
Yes. Just to start off, my name is Prakhar Sharma. I have been in crypto, blockchain, Web3 space for 8 years now. So
Mm-hmm.
the journey for me started while, I was in college. Uh, and, I took a couple of courses in economics while I was in college. And during the classes, I used to study that there are different monetary and fiscal policies with which different central banks uh, design their policies and other things. And on the other hand, I saw that, there is this sort of a new currency that is coming in where the monetary and fiscal policies are something which is baked into it as a code. So this was,
Right.
back in 2014, and I got to know about Bitcoins. So that was something that caught my attention. From there, I did a sort of a healthcare tech startup, ran it for 3 years. In 2017, it got acquired by Enter Health, which is a Canadian healthcare CRM company. After that, I briefly worked for Deutsche Bank, where I was trading in different OTC derivative instruments like IR swaps, inflation swaps, futures, options, and other things. So there, I got a first-hand experience of getting to know the nuances of what goes behind an investment bank.
Right.
But at that time, I authored a white paper on internal trade reconciliation and settlement using blockchains. But just because financial services is an industry which is very heavily guarded by rules and regulations, I didn't got an opportunity to deploy it. So at that particular time, I also got to know that there are a couple of guys in Bangalore who are trying to build a sort of a Indian stable coin. So this was a sort of a bizarre idea in 2018, but like it was intriguing enough to see that hey, there are people who are thinking about this particular approach. So even though that particular idea didn't flew by, but I ended up joining CoinSwitch as one of the early members in their engineering team when the company was just 4 or 5 people. So CoinSwitch started more like a global cryptocurrency exchange aggregator. Then the 2019 bear market came. Bitcoin was again down to $4,000, and there was no volume in the market. So we tried out a couple of different products. We made something which is called Crux Pay, that you can say that was a very highly inspired from UPI, because like the main thesis was at that particular time doing transactions was very difficult. So what UPI did for doing bank-to-bank transactions, we wanted to do it for crypto so that the ease of transaction become more seamless. So we did it for a while. Then in 2020, when the market started recovering, we started seeing volume going up across the exchanges. Then we thought that instead of spreading out ourselves thin across multiple geographies, why not just concentrate in India? So then launched CoinSwitch Kuber, which was like an India-specific exchange, scaled it to like 12 million users within a span of 10 months. So yeah, that was sort of one of the great learning cycles for me to develop a particular product which is very native to the industry and scaling up it with a rapid pace. Then like it started looking more like a casino where that people were coming in buying cryptocurrencies without even getting to know what those things are. And so at that time, I thought of stepping out and start Metasky. In Metasky, one of the core premise and the focus is to be more technology first as opposed to financialization first. So maybe
Okay.
like one of the good or bad thing about blockchain as a technology is that here the financialization of the technology happened way more quicker. Like here the technologies was still not in the correct place. Still the sort of financialization that happened around this particular technology was way rapid. Like if we draw parallels to AI as a technology, like the technology took like 25, 30 years to build it. And now it is the time when retailers are coming in and putting their money. But in blockchain and in crypto, the story was like exact opposite. So in Metasky, we thought of building those crucial infrastructure, which very well
Right.
cement the point that why we need Web3 as a technology, and later on bring the financialization part. So tactically in Metasky, we have developed an infrastructure that helps
Okay.
communities, brands to run interoperable sort of loyalty programs. Through this, brands, creators, like develop different sort of tactics to monetize onto their fan base or the communities that they have formed around their offering or around their products.
Okay, this is very interesting. And your journey has been quite extensive as well. So, you very organically got into perhaps the fintech space first and then into Web3, and now you're building something on your own. So, can you, for somebody who perhaps has never used Metasky, can you perhaps give a flow of how the user experience looks like?
Yeah, so it's a two-faceted sort of a user experience. One, like
Right.
on one side, we have brands as well as creators who can come to a platform and develop certain experiences for their community. So this particular piece is called Metasky Studio. So this is the
Okay.
place where a brand or a creator comes in. And if let's say they already have different sort of socials like Instagram or Twitter, or maybe if they have already launched a sort of NFT collection, they can come in and import these existing collections or plug in their socials directly. So first thing that we do is like populate the whole sort of a user base that these creators or the brands have across these different social networking sites. And through this, we give them a view of their community, that how is their engagement looking like, right? Like who are
Okay.
their top 1% of the most engaging user, then the 5%, and then 20%. Then the next step
Right.
is that based on this particular information, they either end up launching an NFT collection or maybe a membership pass or maybe a sort of a ticketing of their IRL event. There are multitude of experiences that can be created by them. And once these things, so all of these things, like even though these are called a membership card or a ticket, these are NFTs behind the scene. It's up to the brand whether they want to open it up to their audience that, hey, there is a crypto or NFT play behind the scene. Or if they choose that, they still want to call it a membership pass, it will work very seamlessly. The second thing that we have sort of innovated in this particular space is build something which is called a utility marketplace. So utility is something which in turn is going to drive the valuation of NFTs going forward. The first sort of a wave of NFTs that we saw, where we saw a lot of PFP collections, going out for millions of dollars, and a lot of sort of scams going around these particular collections as well. I think, in my opinion, that particular market won't return ever. Right? Definitely, there would be some premium PFP collections coming up from strong brands, celebrity creators, and all these things. But the sort of a craziness that we saw last year, it's difficult to it's difficult
Emulate
that sort of a market will come in.
Right.
The next wave of NFTs would be very much utility driven. So we have developed something which is called a utility marketplace. So this is a sort of a B2B marketplace where the cross collaboration when it comes to utilities can happen. So in this particular utility marketplace, we have Web3 IPs like Goblins, like even a couple of IPs who are derivatives of Bored Ape Yacht Club. Those are listed onto a marketplace. And on the other side of the spectrum, we have Web2 brands like KFC, Marriott, Starbucks, which come in and do collaboration with these Web3 creators or Web3 brands around it. So anyone who is coming in, creating their NFT collection can, with a couple of clicks, integrate these utilities onto their offering. So that is the part where, in a way, you sort of create a sort of a product which has a really good utility, very easy to use. And the third part is now the distribution, like how you take this particular sort of offering and give it to your users across socials, across IRLs, and all these other places. So this is where we have launched something called Bounties. So Bounties is a place where you can design small gamification loops that work on socials. By socials, I mean like you can have a certain sort of a mini gamification loop on Twitter, on Instagram. We have Discord bots where you can do any sort of a like a mini game tournament within your Discord, and the sort of engagement and the distribution that you want to do of the assets that you have created can be done within Discord itself. So this is the first part, which is called the studio, sort of an orchestration place for where the creators as well as brands come in and design their whole campaign as well as execute and monitor it. Onto the other side, we have something which is called Sky Club. So Sky Club is the place where the end users come in and ingest all the experiences that are created by the club. So on and on, it looks like that if, let's say, your brand is giving out a sort of a bounty campaign, or maybe a sort of raffle in which you can get NFT tickets or certain sort of a experience that unlocks doors using the NFTs, then Sky Club becomes a sort of an interface through which these things can be done really easily.
Wow. Okay. So this is interesting because your platform has both a B2B side as well as a B2C side, and you've kind of covered how the next wave of NFTs would be more utility driven. So now I have two questions, and I'll take it one at a time. When you have a platform which is B2B driven as well as B2C driven, that kind of creates a chicken and an egg problem, right? Like, you'll get these platforms to create perhaps bounties and all of these journeys on your platform, and how do you perhaps encourage the users to engage with those bounties? That kind of creates a loop. So how has Metasky in terms of creating a community of engaged users as well as making sure that the businesses are getting a good result after creating a campaign here?
Yeah, so in terms of our go-to-market strategy, till now we have taken a more of a B2B2C approach, where the brands who come in and make the experience using our studio, they are the one who go out and distribute these things within their communities, right? So it is not like where someone discovers a Sky Club and come in and look for that, hey, what are the bounties that are given out? It is more about that you are already a part of a community or a sort of a engagement loop of a particular brand. And through this particular brand, they discover Sky Club. So currently we have close to around 282,000 monthly active users. So these span all these users span across 32 brands that are currently using our services.
Wow, that's brilliant. So now coming to the second part of what you had said earlier, and I wanted to ask about was how you feel strongly that NFTs with a utility would be part of the next wave. So can you give us some good examples of some projects doing that who have successfully been able to do that so far?
Yeah, so see, like I think, like if you start from the top, one necessity with most of these startups as well as even the big brands have is to have a healthy CAC to LTV ratio, right? And when it comes to LTV, loyalty programs have been something which has been, I think, there for the last 10, 15 years. Some of them are performing brilliantly. Like, most of the airlines, they have a sort of a program which works really well. But on the other end of the spectrum, around like 90 to 95% of these loyalty programs are not working anymore. And this is just because that there is an abundance of loyalty programs that are out there in the market, right? So for a normal user perspective, it is that they are exposed to around 17 different loyalty programs at the moment, right? A single user exposed to 17 different loyalty programs. And most of the time it is that they themselves forget that they have to go and maybe they have a coupon code that could be applied in a particular situation. So the engagement rate for most of these loyalty programs are below 50% at the moment, right? And this is mostly happening because most of these loyalty programs are pretty much fragmented, right? And they have a sort of a long tail of low activity users. So these are the users who just sign up and then they are just over there, but not interacting with the program anymore. Most of them are, not most, I think all of them are in a closed ecosystem. And just because they are a part of a closed ecosystem, they have sort of, they face a lot of complexity when they want to scale these particular partnerships, right? So what Web3 has to offer is a sort of a very eased out interoperability across this. So I'll take an example of a couple of brands that are working with us. So in India, we work with a couple of record labels. And over here, I'll mention this record label called Azadi Records. So I think last year, they launched a new album which is called Nayab. And this whole particular experience was done through a sort of a NFT-based ticketing, a NFT-based sort of a community engagement, and all these other things. So even till date, like 1.5 years after the launch of the album, we are seeing a very healthy sort of a secondary market of these NFTs, right? And the reason why there is a very healthy secondary market is because these are the artists who in turn now know that what the top 1% of their community looks like, right? So they know that these are the people who have, done something extra to get in front of them by, buying these NFTs, engaging with the community and all these other things. So these people get a very sort of a great and an in-depth experience whenever they attend any of these concerts or an after party, or if they have any specific brand deals. So very recently, this same record label, they tied up with Nike and dropped Air Force One shoes labeled with the music label specifically for these audience, right? So from a brand perspective, they know that, hey, these are the top, by brand, I mean brands like Nike, Louis Vuitton, and the top end brands. They know that, hey, these are the top 1% of the user who in turn are willing to pay for an extra and exclusive experience around this particular IP, right? So from a Nike or a Louis Vuitton perspective, they see a 60% or a 70% conversion rate coming out from this top 1%, which is sort of unheard for these sort of a brands in a market like India, right? So this is a sort of a monetization opportunity, not just for the brand, but even for the artists who are, the part of the record label, as well as the end audience. So one another sort of a piece over here is that whenever there is a secondary trade happens, 15% of the proceeding or the principal value of the secondary trade goes back to the artist, right? And and in the last one year, this particular collection has done a secondary market trade of around 1.2 crore rupees. So from artist perspective, it is like getting an additional income of 20-25 lakh rupees just by spending some extra time with those people who really like their art and music and all these other things. So like this is one of the example that we saw in India. We also work with a lot of animation houses in Japan. So these are the studios who in turn are sitting on really good IPs, which are like 40, 50, 60 years old. And, it contains animation houses like Torii Animation, the one which is behind One Piece, Bandai Namco, which is behind Pokemon. So what we have seen, so we went over there and had the launch of one another IP, which is called Tanuki. So it's a sort of a whole ecosystem called Tanukiverse, built around this animal, which is called Tanuki, which is also sort of a god in Japanese folklore. So this particular IP got built up very organically. They launched a membership pass for their community. And there is a particular shrine in Yamanashi region, where, which is dedicated to tanukis. And what we saw over there, that one of the local breweries, which was, sort of prevalent in that particular region itself, just because they in turn recognized tanuki as a figure, they launched beers with sort of a tanuki IP label around it. And all of a sudden, they saw their distribution in Singapore, in South Korea, in Japan, in Australia. And for a small sort of a brewery sitting in a village in Japan, getting this sort of a global exposure, just because they in turn tied up with this particular IP. This is like one another example where the cross collaboration across brands towards using a particular distribution mechanics of NFTs becomes very, very prevalent. So this becomes more like a win-win scenario, not just for the IP, but also for the peripheral businesses who in turn, want to engage with this sort of community around these IPs. So, like these are some of the examples, and like I'll just highlight a couple of points that why this mechanics work really well in a Web3 scenario and not it, because like most of these things can be done in a Web2 fashion as well, and it has been happening as well, like the cross-brand collaborations and other things. But what specifically happens in Web3 is that for an end user, there is an exit scenario as well. So it means that if, let's say, I'm buying an NFT and maybe 6 months down the line, I see that, hey, this is not the community where I belong, or maybe I don't have time to, spend and go and engage with the community, then I get an option to make an exit by listing my NFT onto a marketplace, right? So I get as a buyer, I get an immediate liquidity. And from a community or a brand perspective, the top 1%, 5% of the tier always remain fresh. So it means that whenever this top 1% needs to get a good activation, they see activation rate of 80-85% coming from the top tier of 1%, 5% of any community. So this in turn gives a much more dynamic feedback onto the cross-brand collaborations that happen in this scenario.
Wow. This is very, very interesting. And, you've been able to successfully basically carve out a niche here and get the brands engaged in this entire process. And these are Web2 brands traditionally. How much of a challenge was it to, get them on board?
Yeah, see, like I think just because the industry is new, there are two levels that I think anyone who is operating in the industry has to go through. One is like putting a case for Web3 and blockchain as a technology, right? So what we have seen that like currently the market has been much better, but especially in the last year as well as a bit of a year before, the first challenge was to defend blockchain as a technology and its utility to the brands which are very traditional in their thinking, right? So that is the phase. Like I think in most of the first meetings that I have gone through, it was more about defending blockchain and Web3 as a technology, and after that maybe you get a chance to pitch your product, right? So one thing that worked for us is that we focused on KPIs, which in turn is something that all of these brands recognize. So we own KPIs like increasing the LTV, or maybe like cutting down on cost of running their existing loyalty programs, cutting down the time in terms of closing cross-brand deals. So these are the things where we learn to speak in their language, right? And after that, maybe we can put in the proposition that, hey, this is the longer roadmap that you can go through in terms of the interoperability and all these other things. So in that respect, the whole industry is pretty new at the moment. And even though we have seen certain success stories coming from big brands, but in terms of the utility experienced, it will be mostly the mid-tier growing brands that will see the most utility coming out. So even though like the loyalty program of Starbucks made the most news, but when it comes to the numbers, I think last year the whole Starbucks Odyssey program made a revenue of around $1.6 million, And if we look at the total revenue generated by Starbucks, it's like $32 billion. So from a brand perspective, someone making a $32 billion in revenue, trying to put a case for an experiment which has done a